Here we'll be doing some examples on quadratic equation, how to solve questions on quadratic equation. What are quadratic equation? Quadratic equation are equation that takes this form. For example, this is an expression. This is a quadratic trinomial. Now, when quadratic trinomial is equated to 0, it becomes quadratic equation. When you are given a quadratic equation, you are meant to resolve the equation by getting the value for the variable. Now we are required to find the value of the variable. What is the variable? That's variable x. This value variable x is the next to be gotten. Now when you have quadratic trinomials, there are expressions that have 3 terms, of which they consist of a variable having the highest power of what? Of 2. Now looking at this, since you have your highest power of x to be 2, the possible values for this variable will be 2. Now when I start doing some examples on it, you will see that we have possible 2 values that will make this equation equal to 0. To solve quadratic equation, 2 things are needed to be done. Factorize the quadratic trinomials. Now when you are solving for this variable x, now you are to factorize these quadratic trinomials first. And when you factorize these quadratic trinomials, you will end up arriving at the answer in this form, like x plus a, x plus b. This is just an illustration. You end up getting something like that. Now, what is the next thing you have to do? Equate the 2 terms you got from factorization of quadratic trinomials to 0. Like this is what I'm saying. You have x plus a. For example, this is not the value gotten from this. You equate it to 0, meaning your x plus a is equal to 0, or x plus b is equal to 0, and x is equal to 0 minus a, x is equal to minus a, or x is equal to 0 minus b, x is equal to minus b. Now, from your factorization, the process will follow this end. Note, this is not the value gotten from the factorization of this. It is just an illustration. Now, yeah, you'll be able to get 2 values for this answer, minus a and minus b. Now, this is a process you will follow when solving any quadratic equation. I'm going to be solving some examples to make you understand this better. Solve the quadratic equation 6x² minus 13x plus 5 is equal to 0. Now you have 6x² minus 13x plus 5 is equal to 0. Now how do we go about it? From my previous discussion, I said factorize these trinomials first. Now how do we factorize? You factorize by getting 2 numbers first. Get 2 numbers that when you add those 2 numbers together, a plus b, you have this middle value, the coefficient of x, you have minus 13. And when you multiply the 2 numbers together, you have the multiplication of 6 and 5. That is the multiplication of the leading coefficient and the constant. That will be 30. 6 times plus 5 is 30. Now when you have the multiplication of the 2 numbers, you have plus 30. Now let's look for the number. Now if you want to get this number, you use 30 as a major target. Find those factors of 30 that will give you those answers. Now looking at this, minus 10 minus 3 will give us minus 13, and minus 10 times minus 3 will give us what? Plus 30. How? Minus times minus is plus, 10 times 3 is 30. Now we've gotten our 2 numbers. Now you replace this 13, minus 13, with these 2 numbers with the inclusion of x. Now you have your value to be 6x squared minus 10. The first number, x, minus 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. Can you see? Now we have those 2 numbers. Note, if you add this up again, you still arrive back at this answer. Now you have 6x squared. Now the second thing you have to do, how do we factorize? You factorize the first 2 terms first and the second 2 terms. How do you factorize this? Find common factors between 6x squared and minus 10. What are those common factors here? We have 2x. 2x is common. You have 2x. Now you have your value to be 3x 3x minus 5. They say 2x times 3x will give us 6x squared. 2x times minus 5 will give us minus 10x. Now let's go to the second one. Minus, what are the common factors here? Just 1. You have 1 minus 1. Then you have 3x minus 5. Why is this minus? The negative sign here changes it. When you multiply this negative with this, it still comes back to plus. Now you equate it to what? Equate it to 0. Note, when you factorize trinomial, the value in this bracket when you factorize must be the same. Once you begin to discover that these values are different, know that it is wrong. Now you bring out this value first to factorize. You have 3x minus 5, then 2x minus 1. 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now we have already factorized this trinomial. We have our two values to be 3x minus 5 times 2x minus 1. Now, since we are equating to 0, we are solving for the variable x, and we know that there are two possible values for variable x because it's carrying the highest power 2. Now, if the highest power is 3, which means you have 3 possible answers for x. If this value is 4, you have 4 possible answers for x. Now, since this is a trinomial, we have 2 possible values for x because the highest power of x here is 2. Now, you have 3x minus 5 is equal to 0, or 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, let's quickly resolve that. You have 3x is equal to 0 plus 5, or 2x is equal to 0 plus 1. Then 3x is equal to 5. We have x to be equal to 5 over 3. Or you have 2x to be equal to 1. We have our x to be 1 over 2. Now we get our possible value for x. What are those possible value for x? The possible value for x is what? 5 over 3 or 1 over 2. Now you have solved this quadratic equation. I believe you understand. Let me solve another example. Here is another example. 2a squared minus a minus 1 is equal to 0. First, factorize. Find two numbers that when you add up to give us minus 1, the coefficient of a. Then when you multiply, it will give us the multiplication of leading coefficient 2 times minus 1, that's minus 2. Now listen, in quadratic trinomial, x is not the only variable. They can use any letter for variable. Now looking at this now, what will be the two numbers? The two numbers will be minus 2 plus 1. Minus 2 plus 1 will give us minus 1. Minus 2 times plus 1 give us minus 2. Now, since we have the two numbers, you substitute it into this place, including the variable a. Now you have 2a squared minus 2a plus 1a. 1a is still a, minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, minus 2a plus a will give us minus a. Now, let's factorize. How do we factorize this? You factorize the first two terms. Look for common factor from the first two terms and later come back to the last two terms. Now, here you have 2a squared minus 2a. What are the common factors here? Common factors here is 2a. You have a minus 1. 2a times a is 2a squared minus 2a times 1 is 2a. Now let's come here plus, what will be the common factor here? Common factor here will be 1. Then you still have a minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, since the two bracket values are the same, you bring one out, you have your a minus 1, then 2a plus 1 is equal to 0. Now, having factorized this trinomial, you equate both to 0 to get the value of a. Now you have a minus 1 is equal to 0, or 2a plus 1 is equal to 0. Then you have a is equal to 0 plus 1, a is equal to 1, or 2a is equal to 0 minus 1, 2a is equal to minus 1, a here is equal to minus 1 over 2. Now we have our possible value for a to be 1 or minus 1 over 2. Now we've gotten our possible value. Now to solve this quadratic equation, you look for the value of a, and the value of a here will be two possible values because the first term, the leading coefficient, the variable is carrying the highest indexed value to be 2. Now the value for our a is equal to 1 or minus 1 over 2. Thank you.